Welcome everybody, I'm Santiago Kneeland and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. Before a child encounters theology or philosophy, they encounter stories, heroes, journeys, sacrifices, and triumphs that quietly shape their understanding of courage, goodness, and truth. Myth has always been humanity's first spiritual language. Together with my guest Margie, we'll explore how these stories we tell children, from ancient myths to modern epics like Star Wars and Tolkien, help awaken their inner seeker and prepare their heart for the deeper spiritual realities of the universe. So welcome, Margie. It's an interesting topic. We've always enjoyed our conversations about myth and Star Wars, but this one I think is very, very important.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you for having me on, Santiago. But like you, I think this is, this is very, very important, particularly for young people that are having young children now or anticipating having children in the future. Being concerned about their development and their.
Yeah.
This is a good conversation to have.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, and there's a lot of topics to cover, but we'll start from the beginning. So here in this first segment, which is the first library of the soul, we'll explore what the bases are. And before a child ever reads scripture, they meet a hero. Stories are the first library of the soul, where children learn to recognize courage, loyalty, sacrifice, and mercy. Across cultures and generations, myth has always served as a training ground for the human spirit. In this segment, we'll explore why these stories children love, from ancient mythology to modern sagas, quietly plant the seeds of spiritual identity and moral imagination. So tell us, Margie, in your experience and in what you've seen, and especially in your great attraction and appeal towards mythology, what can you tell us about this foundations that we have with children and what we tell them?
Well, it goes back. I can even remember how enthralled I was by stories of my parents or my grandparents when they would talk about the olden days. That was sort of the thing. And so, a child gets sort of into that, which is sort of the family mythology, which is great. I mean, it's wonderful because it builds those relationships with your grandparents and your aunts and uncles and cousins and everything. But then you began to look outside of that situation, and you're looking at begin to as you grow a little bit more, you look at the broader world. Of course, you're reading and you're involved in school but you begin to want to understand more. But you're also at that age, when you're playing, you may
Yeah,
be playing cowboys and Indians or whatever, and there's but it's this thing about good versus bad or good
yeah,
versus evil, that sort of thing. And so you begin to look at stories about that where there's always like a hero, and then there's the really bad guy,
yeah, yeah,
and now when I was growing up, there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, there was Superman and there were, the comics and stuff like that. And the boys had books like Tom Swift and Tom Swift Jr. My dad read Tom Swift and I read Tom Swift Jr.,
okay,
which were like a science-based sort of thing. But the lead male characters in those were strong but very, very caring male roles. Okay. The interesting part about it is that there were hardly any females in those.
yeah, yeah.
And so,
and we're going to
yeah,
talk about that later. But yeah, it's interesting how in that time it was basically just male heroes,
yeah,
right?
it was just totally, it was totally male, kind of male dominated. There were a few women, there was like the Nancy Drew books and the Trixie Bell. There were a few series like that were like teenage girls. But even in those books, they didn't have mothers to mount. Their mothers were very superficial
Yeah, yeah,
characters. And, it was really kind of, interesting. But if you were more interested in looking for like strong women, you had to go to like real hardcore mythology and start looking. And so
Yeah.
I can remember at 9, I started reading Bullfinch's mythology
Okay.
because I wanted to know about Diana of the Hunt, and Olympia and all these other that were,
Which are
I mean,
now superheroes, which
yeah,
Diana
right.
is Wonder Woman,
Wonder
right?
Woman, right, right, but she was really a goddess under the in old mythology. I mean,
In the
that's the
origin,
reason
yeah.
yeah, that's the reason they named her Diana
Yeah,
in Wonder
exactly.
Woman, and so, anyway, it was just so when I look back at my life and I look at the progression of how I was, I was looking for a heroine, that was on a journey and had a purpose and was doing things, whether it was the supernatural world or the natural world. Um, and so it was really, it was an interesting time to grow up. But I'm 76 years old, so I was growing up in the 1950s when
Yeah.
things were just becoming. I don't ever remember not having a television, I will tell you that, but, it was not, anywhere near as even though we're not quite equitable now, it's the it was very, masculine. Everything that
Yeah.
that showed
Yeah.
any strength or anything was very masculine, but they were good role models, okay? They
Okay.
they did they did do good,
Okay.
and, the biggest thing about a lot of them was that they weren't they had very little depth. In other words, they were good all the time, 100%. They couldn't make a
Yeah.
mistake, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's sort of kind of the wrong message, I think, as a kid, when you're looking out, is that you can't make a mistake and be redeemed and go on, learn from your mistake and do better, which now it's gotten a little bit more realistic in that, there's a lot of the heroes do make they make bad
They
mistakes.
go through a process, the
Right,
classical hero's journey, and that's part of the story, and that how we can relate, and we see the
right.
same things in our life. How we go through that story. But yeah, totally, and you understand the reasons behind it. But yeah, there's a lot of things to unpack here. But I mean, continue, and we'll talk about it in a minute.
Well, no, I just remember, now characters are really have a lot of depth and very much three where before they were very almost one dimensional in that this thing about it wasn't the real hero's journey like you would find
Yeah.
in old mythology, where some of the gods did really bad, in mythology they did bad things, but some of them, ultimately did choose or maybe choose or by mistake did something good. But but then we went through this period where it was very kind of one dimensional. But now, we see our characters as they do make decisions that may not be the best for all concerned, but they learn from those.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have to experience a period of redemption, and then they go on and continue their journey through life. So
They learn those lessons, and that's important. And I think, especially, I mean, that you can understand everything behind it, and that's something that I like. The way that George Lucas presented, and this is a side note, Star Wars is at the beginning. He first introduces Darth Vader as this evil guy, but then you see the before of why he turned to evil, and then you see that redemption. So it's an interesting situation because for 20 plus years, we really had this idea of Darth Vader, and suddenly we see the human part of him and why. Everybody probably thought, it was just mere power, but it was really trying to save his love. His love is his life. So you kind of understand and see where a mistake can be made. You're not perfect, and these situations where he wants to save her put you in that place, right?
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and you see this, somewhat again and again. I mean, Tolkien used it a lot in Lord of the Rings. The Aragorn, he had basically rejected who he was,
Yeah.
and was just out kind of wandering the earth. He knew he wanted to do good. It was like, but he didn't want to pick up the mantle,
Yeah.
of doing it. He resisted that for a long time. And um Elrond and Gandalf and they all called him out on it on more than one occasion. And but then in the end, when the ring finally came forward and he knew that was his,
Yeah.
he had to pick up the mantle, and or in this case the sword, that it was remade, and go forward. Okay, but it was
It
but
wasn't
he,
easy.
yeah, it
No.
wasn't easy, but he also wasn't that sterling of a character from the very, I mean, he was a wanderer, he went out
Yeah.
wandering all over, but he wasn't really, he was gathering intelligence or something like that, but he was not wanting to be the leader he was
Yeah. He
supposed to
didn't
be.
want to assume the responsibility, that was
Right, right.
putting, yeah, and that's part of the journey as well, rejection at first, but then there's something that really, that you can't get out of it. So, we see that. So now, in this case that we're talking about the foundations, with childhood, how good is this? Because one of the things that I believe, especially, in many cases, stories, and you can tell stories, and I know that you have a wonderful project that you're going to tell us about, Uncle Joshua's workshop, and you're going to tell us what the basis, or why you created that. But in my opinion, it's really hard, especially something so abstract and so beyond our comprehension, like God and divinity and relations, within the universe. It's really difficult to explain a child, toddler, teenager. Well, maybe a teenager you can start, more of those concepts. So I believe that it's really fundamental that they grow up, especially like we were saying in the prior conversation. When they're tweens, that they have this foundations, this formation, these stories, these heroes, that they see their struggles, that they can relate with these struggles, and that they find basically their ideals. Why do I fight for this? Why do I do this? Why do I struggle? They find their values, because it's very important. It's something that it's imposed. Oh, you can't do this or you can't do that. You have to do this or you have to do that. But it's really them realizing and saying, I'm sacrificing this because of the better good, or am I doing this because I'm going to be better? So I see that, in these stories, and who doesn't want to become a hero, and a hero is really somebody, with my son, he always takes his lightsaber, and he's defeating everybody, so you're always defeating, like you said, evil. So you see this, it's basically something that's ingrained in us, because that's what we're doing in life. We're taking decisions, and when you're mature and when you're older, between doing good and doing evil in many cases. So I believe that these are foundations that, if they're not there, the kids are going to be without these values, these very, they have to be ingrained. So later in stages in life, when they start seeking, when they start, going out, they have these values, and that's what really guides them. That's what points them in the trajectory to really learn about things, and become, spiritually more adept. So I know that was a lot of stuff. So
That was
just wanted to
perfect.
throw that and
Yeah,
get your
yeah.
opinion on that.
Right. No, I totally agree with you that, you know, children, it's not so much that we want to ingrain them or indoctrinate them in
Yeah.
anything. We want them, to come to it in their own way, and we know that they have a divine spark within them that will lead them ultimately if they are open to that. But I think, to suggest to a child, that they have a guardian angel, that they have someone that is totally interested in them, that God loves them. I can tell you a funny personal story. They taught me when I was 6 years old that God was love. I heard that
Okay.
statement, and I bought totally into that. Okay, and they never could ever shake me off of it. That's the reason I could never believe in hell, even though I
Okay.
was raised in a very conservative, religious background. There were certain things that I just could not buy
Yeah.
into because of that statement that God was love. Because if God was love, there would be no hell. Okay.
Exactly,
And,
exactly.
yeah, I mean, there was just that was just, and so it was really funny. I mean, like, I was 6 years old in or 7 years old, and I was in Sunday school, and they started talking about hell, and I just said, I don't believe in that.
I
They were
imagine
like,
the reaction.
"Whoa," and they would say, "But," and I would go, "No, that's no, no, God is love." I would just say, "God is love," and no,
Yeah,
and,
yeah, yeah.
so it got to be kinda funny. I mean, they would just, like, then later, when we got older, like 11, 12 years old, we'd be in Sunday school. I grew up with all these people, and somebody would say something about hell, and somebody would go, "But Margie didn't believe in that." You know?
Yeah, well,
And
but you see,
you
well,
know?
that's the case. I mean, but I mean, how strong was that about that the image that you had about God's quality of love that
Right,
didn't dogma or any beliefs that didn't really match. They didn't make sense, and you basically passed through all that. So it's interesting
right.
how that what we're saying, how that
Yeah,
grounds
but
you.
yeah, but that's, it's just something that within me, of course, now I say that that was, the God that was within me was saying,
Yeah,
this is the course you need to stay on, okay? And it was, we used to sing the song, Jesus loves all the little children of the world. Well, then there was no way that that there was any part of that. So, um anyway, it was kind of humorous for the 7-year-old would stand up in the middle of Sunday school and say, "Well, no, you're wrong." But, but something within me told me to do that. But, and my parents had not said that to me or whatever. I don't know, I just bought into that. Well, I think there are times in children's lives when they hear or experience something or whatever, it really, sort of maybe sets in their mind, and that's
yeah,
what heroes do or heroines do is that they go, I want to be like that person.
yeah.
I want to be,
The role models fit for
yeah,
basically.
I want
Yeah,
to be I want to be the good here. I don't want to be the bad, or I don't want to be the evil. And so this is, these are pivotal moments, but they're personal in our own
yeah,
lives. And when you get older, of course, you can look back and you can see them, in your life. But when you're going through them, you don't necessarily,
yeah.
uh,
You don't
you know,
realize it.
yeah, you don't necessarily recognize them.
Yeah,
But they are very, very formative to your life. But it's not I think as a parent, you can, I mean, you've got 3 children, and I think it's very important that you model good behavior for them, and you
yeah.
point out when you see good behavior and when you see not good behavior. I think it's a different thing
Or
to
when
say.
you misbehave as well, and that's something that you constantly have to battle. I mean, the stress of life. Ever you come home and suddenly, you this and that, and suddenly you may lash out, or maybe you're not. I don't want to say lash out, but you're not that loving as you are.
Right,
So
you're not
you
as
have to
kind and loving,
recognize, yeah,
and
and yeah, and I always remember and say, sometimes especially my smallest daughter, and he says, "Can you brush my teeth?" It's like, oh, come on, and I remember, I stop myself and say, there's going to be a time when she's not going to ask you to do that, so you better take advantage of all these moments, and that really changes my mindset, and I go and do that. So it's really
right,
important,
yeah,
how you show them, and sometimes that I get angry, or maybe I cursed or did something, I misbehaved, and it's always and especially when it's against them, I go back and I apologize and I tell them, it's always important to realize, and we always commit errors, but it's more that you realize them. So it's important that
right,
because in the end,
yeah,
that's
and
we teach them.
right, and you take responsibility for it, and you say that, yeah, you truly ask for forgiveness and say you're sorry,
Yeah,
and that's and you try to take a better path. Okay, well, that teaches the children around you, or the even the more adult people around you that, I mean, a lot of people think that to admit that you're wrong shows, tremendous vulnerability and all that. It doesn't. It shows huge strength,
exactly.
and that's what you're teaching a child is that to admit you're wrong and then seek forgiveness be truly sorry or repentant. When you get to the big things that go on in your life, you'll have had all those little experiences along the
Yeah.
way that have been building for you. Okay. It may be from the time that like I was 6 years old until, I was in college and people were really into very conservative religious stuff, and I was still like going, Nope." It was, but you knew how from all of those experiences, you knew how to be faithful to your belief,
Yeah.
not be cruel and not be a know-it-all and not be, but
Yeah.
and put it in terms of yourself. Okay. But this is what I believe.
Yeah. You're steadfast in your belief.
Yeah, you're steadfast in your belief and what you believe, but you also have to allow other people to believe what they choose to believe too. But that's what's so interesting when you start looking at heroes,
Yeah.
in books or movies or whatever, okay? That, they allow or accept people or characters or whatever as they are. I mean,
Yeah.
you can look at all of them, and there's always somebody that kind of is a little different, a little
Yeah.
strange, or does stuff, and everybody just sort of knows that that's who they
Yeah.
are.
He's accepted as they are, as it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as they are, so these are all the lessons that we grow up with, the thing is that we need to identify them as, the things that we want to model and the things that we don't want to
Yeah. Exactly.
model.
It's as
Yeah,
simple as that. It's one or the other. Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Margie, for all this information. Now we're going to be moving to our second segment, which is what happens afterwards. What happens after children get the spaces? What comes next? Now we're going to talk about the moment children become seekers. At some point in childhood, something shifts. Wonder becomes curiosity, curiosity becomes questioning, and suddenly a child is no longer just enjoying stories. They are searching for meaning. This is the moment when heroes become mirrors and stories become maps. In this segment, we'll explore how myth helps guide children through this awakening, helping them navigate identity, purpose, and the first steerings of their own spiritual paths. So, in childhood, we become of age and we see a lot of traditions, Hebrew traditions. Basically, all of them, find the rites of passage around the 13-year-old mark. So that's really when you hit puberty, and suddenly you start finding this identity. And if you already had this basis, this hero basis, then you can take these values and these ideals, of what you constructed of that role model, and start now looking and seeking for, number one, who you are, your identity, and number two, what's out there, who is in there, that longing for God. So in my case, I'm going to make this point here is I always started, when I turned this age, there's a longing to know more about God, and that's what really got me to this place. But what can you tell us about this age, Margie, and this process that we go through?
Well, I can relate to it. Personally, I was seeking. I was seeking a lot, and I was a big reader. So I was reading a lot of books that had it was almost like a mystical sort of experience where people would have they would be a seeker themselves, and then they would find an answer, and or whatever, or found something that I remember one book which was by W. Somerset Maugham called The Razor's Edge. I don't know if you've ever read.
Yes, of course.
Okay. And that book had rather a profound effect on me when I read it. I think I picked it up when I was like 11 or 12 years old.
Oh, that you're very young, because that's something I think that they give you in high school, or sort
Right,
of that.
yeah. But I was a voracious reader, and
Okay.
so I read In fact, as by the time I graduated high school, I had read almost the entire library of my high school library by that time.
Really?
There was one other guy that was a friend of mine. He and I were both the most voracious readers in the school, and but in the process of that, I had started really young, and so when I read The Razor's Edge, that sort of put me on a you know, and and then I read J.D. Salinger, and particularly Franny and Zooey really kind of got to me as to, because they were seeking
Yeah.
something, and the way they were going about do it, and then that got me through into Herman Hesse, and when I read The Glass Speed Game. I don't know if you've ever read that book by him, but that book just kind of like blew me away. And but I was once again I was seeking. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't believe in God. I've never not, I don't think, in my life, not believed in God, but it was that more of that communication. I didn't really had not developed which we know from our studies of the Urantia book, that developing a prayer and a worship sort of experience, a personal one. There had been no guidance really. I mean, prayer was sort of like a communal thing in
Okay.
my church, and you prayed, at before you ate a meal, but to thankful for the food. But there was this idea about a conversation,
Yeah.
between a personal conversation between you and God, was seemed, it was pretty elusive to me
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
for a really, a long time. And I was reading these books trying to see how other people did it, or how they reached a place in their life where they were satisfied with who they were. And I think everybody that grows up, everybody that's a teenager and beyond until you're 30, you're at this point, where you're trying to seek who you
Yeah.
really are. I'm not talking about the external part of you, who you are in here, the part that
Yeah. Yeah.
is, between you and God. And so so reading about all these people, and some of these were, very heroic, but a lot of them were very flawed, heroes or heroines.
Imperfect heroes. Yeah,
Yeah, right,
definitely.
very imperfect, but that made them more real, because they made mistakes, and yet
And they're relatable because that's, I
yeah,
mean, and you can realize and say, yeah, that happened to me as well. And how did this
right.
guy go mend it? Oh, there's ways to mend it. Yeah.
Right. And so it was just it was a slow slow process, as this should be, as we begin. None of we all, it's like my old mentor that I had years ago, who's has moved on, but my old mentor, he said, we all want instant revelation, like an instant change. I mean, we all want
With no
that.
effort.
Yeah, yeah. But the reality is that all of these things are evolutionary.
Yeah,
We are participating in evolution, our own personal evolution, the evolution of our family, the evolution of our community, the evolution of our society, and the
mm,
evolution of our planet.
definitely.
And everybody, it's like they talk about evolution as something in the past. Well, it's not.
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, but it's going on right now, and the most important one is the one that's going on inside of you. Okay,
That
is
spiritual
your
evolution. Yeah,
is your own evolution, moving to be closer, and hopefully have I mean, that's what Jesus, talked about, was that he had this constant communication with the Father, and um, you know, um, Franny and Zooey and Salinger talked about that, about the prayer without ceasing. That was a big thing in there, and so I even read the Pilgrim's Journey. I don't know if that was a
okay,
book
yeah,
that yeah, I read all that, because I realized that that was what I was. That's the reason that sort of literature appealed to me so much, because they were seekers. They were
yeah.
really very much seeking, and I was, I was
Yeah.
too. And,
It's
you know
funny and yeah, but I'm trying to remember, especially at that age, maybe latter teens, 18, 19 is when I had the big change. But yeah, I remember Paulo Coelho, the one of I read that and shoot, I forgot the name of but it was the first book that I read on the subject, and it was a whole story of this guy, and looking for happiness, and he went through his life basically, and in the end he found happiness, and was very interesting. But yeah, there's definitely this situation in life when and I like the way that you framed it, that you're seeking, and it's not just seeking your identity, which is I think that's something that you are doing, seeking how place within society. What are you going to do? What are you going to work on? What are you going to spend your time for your duration here on earth? um but the most important one is that seeking to find God, to have that personal connection. In my case, it's very interesting, and I'm going to make this story, and then I'll let you share with us. But there were so many flawed things from Catholicism that I found, while I was growing up, and the Trinity, and then I could never understand it, and they would never explain it. It was supposed to be a myth or a mystery. Sorry. Then the atonement, and why did God have to kill His Son, and why did so I got to a point when I was 18, 19 that what, not that I am against it, but it doesn't appeal to me anymore. I did not that I threw away Jesus, but this structure didn't work for me, and the opposite was I was really, and I've said this a lot of times, it was really the Native American traditions and that vision or that concept of more of the third person of the Trinity, more of nature, more of the divine minister, more of that spirit within all of us.
Mhm.
So that really kind of set me into this seeking path, and eventually returned to full step, all the way back to Jesus when I relearned about him through the Rancher book. So it's really important, how these foundations and then, that I never, like you, ceased questioning, got to a point where I was spent, and that's where I started looking. So how important is this stage for a person, as we were talking, as we're talking?
Well, I think, it it's incumbent on us to realize that everybody's journey is very, very personal, because every person is unique. Every person
Yeah.
is a child of God, and they are a unique child of God, and only they can make their contribution to God's plan. But, um, to talk about it, and to acknowledge that journey and that struggle, and I mean, that's the reason I think it's so important when you're like in high school and late high school, college, and as early adults, is to have a circle of friends that you can talk about these very
Yeah, it's
important
important.
important issues. And a lot of people today don't have that. I mean, that's what.
That's true. And the situation, society, how we communicate does not, foster that situation. But I agree with you. I had very good friends where you would just talk and talk and talk and talk, and, no judgment, and you just throwing everything out. But definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but unfortunately, like I said, there are, in many cases, young folks that don't necessarily have that circle, and a lot of it is because we're very, the world over, is that we're moving a lot. I mean, a lot of people, when you move, you're when you're a sophomore in high school or a junior in high school, and you get moved to the other side of the world. I mean, you don't. It takes a while to develop those sort of relationships. Don't
Yeah.
happen overnight. Okay, and so, that's one thing, that is that if you can, even if it's just one other person. There's an author. His name is Parker Palmer. He's actually comes out of the Quaker tradition, and he does these things called circles of trust, which were
Oh, yeah.
he designed actually for teachers. but when I think about it, when I look back at my circle of friends that I was very close to and grew up with and became an adult with, um, we did have a great circle of trust, where it was us and what we discussed, and it didn't go outside of that. It was there, and we trusted each other with
Yeah.
who we actually were. Okay. And, so to form these sort of, circles of trust, I think is very important, not only socially for you to understand. I
Yeah.
mean, when you've got friends and you're starting to date or pair off or find looking for a mate, you want to do a family, your ideas, you need to bounce these off of your friends. Okay. You need, and trust that they're giving you good information. Okay.
Yeah. That their
And
intentions are good,
yeah,
basically.
right. And so, but that sort of relationship doesn't happen,
Yeah.
once again overnight. But that those sort of relationship, but it's also people that you can talk to about your true feelings. Be they about what you believe or what you don't believe, or what you like in your case, where you were rejecting things out of the religious tradition you had been reared in, that you didn't, because I mean a lot of these things you can't necessarily take to an older generation because they're maybe already inculcated in the tradition and they're happy there, and that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you're
As long as you're happy, that's good, and you
That's
have
right,
faith.
but if you're not, you need to have somebody that you can, share
Yeah.
these sort of things with, and, uh, d l l I was, very, until I found, the book and started and immediately, was able to surround myself with people that were, as interested in this personal relationship with God as I was, without all the dogma attached to a
Yeah.
conservative or institutionalized religion. That was that was really became very fulfilling. I mean,
Yeah.
very
Yeah. I
both
agree.
both socially and a community, and but particularly spiritually, because
Yeah.
they were very much like they were seeking a personal
Yeah.
relationship with God too. And so, but
And
that's
in this case, what I like is that there's no hierarchy. So it's not that this guy knows more, this guy knows that,
Mhm.
and that's what I really like. There's no competition, and it's really, and that's what I really enjoy about these conversations. I learned so much, and from all the points of view and all the everything that you guys bring and comment. I mean, it really enriches everything, and this is what we're doing. We're just doing this experience. What we're saying, right?
Well, we're just trying to let people know that you are going to find your way, and God does love you, and you are a very unique and loved individual. And you need to recognize this in yourself, and you really belong to this incredible community that you're not perhaps even aware of. And I'm not talking about the arrangement community. I'm talking about the community of all spiritual beings in the
Yeah,
universe that that are devoted to God's plan, which is God's plan is love.
yeah.
And so that's what you're really. I mean, that's what I signed up for anyway.
No, I like
So,
it, and I really I like this.
that's
I like the way, and it's a great point to end this segment in coming full circle to saying what really drove you, which is God is love, and that's really was your compass and your anchor for all of this, and it brought you, and how important how we're seeing in these two segments, especially how as a child you open up your curiosity and your heart, and then when you get older, you kind of start making those decisions and directing your efforts to doing that will that you're talking about, not just taking care of yourself, but of others, and of being a good person. And it comes to really just, I know that you like science, so it becomes really a question of positive, negative, or neutral. You come here and their energy, you just can classify it that way. Why not put it in a positive instead of
Hmm.
just keeping it neutral, or dare not go into the negative? Yeah, to put
Right.
it in a colloquial way,
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. That, and I mean, all that time that I was seeking, I was also building a career and doing all the, and relationships, and family was expanding, and children being born, and things like that. But that doesn't mean that you're not you should abandon you. I mean, I think it's very easy to say, "Well, I'll do that later." I'll do that
Yeah,
later. But reality is that if you want a really, for me, this I'm speaking personally, is that building that solid foundation spiritually within myself, knowing who I was, which was I am a child of God and he loves me. That's the foundation from which everything else, that it gave such a security to
yeah,
develop in all these other areas, of my life, of which I have been incredibly blessed.
definitely.
And for which I am very, very grateful.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and, this is
It
what I hope.
becomes you. I like this because you became love. That's so it becomes a habit in the end. So I really like
Yeah.
this. Now we're going to be talking about the balance, and especially what we're seeing nowadays. And we're not saying one overpowering the other, but it's a balance. The word is balance, and if you see justice, or if you see what a balance is, it's that it's equal. There's no one overpowering the other one, and they're equal stands. So greatest stories are never about strength alone. They're about balance. The hero moves forward, the heroine holds the center. Together, they represent the deeper harmony woven into the universe itself. From Leia and Rey to Galadriel and Hermione, modern storytelling is rediscovering something ancient. Strength and compassion were never opposites. In this final segment, we explore how these balanced archetypes help children understand leadership, identity, and the divine partnership at the heart of creation. So it's an interesting story because I think it has a very interesting foundation, which is the relationship of our Creator Son and our Mother Spirit.
Uh-huh.
That relationship and that interaction that created this, not only this, but throughout the grand universe, creates all the universes, is the model that really human life bases off of. This by and I like it how the Urantia books puts it. It's a variation of the same species that we
Mhm.
have within humanity, that we understand this balance and we become a team. So I'm excited to hear about hear your take about this, Margie.
Yeah. Well, I find it very interesting because, like I said, when I was growing up, it was very male, masculine, sort of dominated. But as I have gone through my life, and I've gone through an era in our society where women have gained more and more rights. I mean, when I was born, a woman could not get a bank account without like her husband's or her father's signature and things like that. Of course, that had changed by the time I got to be, when I came of age, where I mean, I couldn't vote. Now you can vote at 18. I couldn't vote till I was 21. But
Okay.
yeah, and so I've seen a lot of a lot of change in my life, as far as like women gaining status in the world. And our literature and our heroes journeys now have some amazing heroines for us to look at, that we didn't. You had to look back into the old mythology to find
Yeah.
really strong female archetypes, and now we've got plenty of them. I mean, and they are truly, wonderful, one after another. I mean, just out of the Harry Potter, when you look at what Hermione did, particularly at the end, if she hadn't grabbed that bag, that had the tent and everything. They could not have, Ron and Harry could not have survived out in the wilds, doing all the planning and finding all the Horcruxes if she had not had that
Which is a
courage.
very maternal that action, and
Right,
and it's
right.
we're
She took care of
exactly.
their physical, their physical needs, but she was also through the whole thing, concerned about their emotional needs too.
Hmm.
That's the reason they started, passing the thing around so that nobody, because they realized it drained their energy. And so it was, she was that. But there was also another amazingly, or two other women that were in the Harry Potter. Professor McGonagall was
Mm.
amazing, particularly at the end. When she called all those giants out of the castle, to defend it. That was truly. I mean, that just like blew me away. And then,
It's not only nurturing; they are powerful. They can
yeah,
cast demons out of there.
right. But all through the whole series, um, she's really looking after them. I mean, she's not
Yeah,
a warm fuzzy mom, but she's a mom you could count on. Okay, she's
yeah.
the woman that you can count on. And then there's Ms. Weasley. There's Ron and the whole Weasley clan's mom. She's truly incredible. I mean, with
Just the
first of
amount
all,
of kids there that
well, all
makes
the
her
kids, the house,
incredible.
everything that she does, and then in the end, she really shows her stuff at the very end, and and she loses a child in the end, and the whole thing, and so those are three incredibly strong women. um Even Jenny, you could see that Jenny was coming into her own at the end,
Hmm.
and so in that respect, there were, a number of strong, strong female characters. They did do a few that were a little, but you got to have
No,
all
but
ends of the spectrum, yeah.
yeah,
But
but it's good. I mean, the qualities and how
oh
they
yeah,
brought
yeah, right, and
the
so
nurturing qualities and the female qualities that they brought
yeah.
apart from their strength would really balance that story.
Right, and then
Definitely.
yeah, and then when you look at Tolkien, and there's Arwen, okay, who is, I mean, she was in Rivendell, basically waiting for Aragorn to finally mature. I mean, she obviously loved him and he loved her, but they weren't going to get together as long as he was not, But in the end, she gave up immortality to be with him, but it wasn't out of, it was because she was strong is the
Yeah.
reason, and because she realized that there was going to be a child, okay, and that was the important thing, was that there would be a child.
And there was a
And
very important bond, I think, with
uh,
Aragorn there.
yeah,
That you see that they are working as a society, as a team, which is very important. You don't see one overdoing the other. You see perfect balance in that relationship.
remember when Frodo got hurt so badly, he called on Arwen.
Yeah,
Aragorn called on Arwen all the way out of Rivendell, and
yeah.
she rode to get him, and to take him to Rivendell so he wouldn't die. And I mean, he recognized the strength in his partner, and he called upon it, and she showed
And
up.
a power that he couldn't go. I mean, she was an elf, but the elfish, and well, he was actually also had half blood, but the female nurturing, we see it again. We see
Uh-huh.
how she goes and she tends to Frodo. She brings him to the womb to
Right.
nurture. So we see those actions, powerful actions, because she didn't have to go into a field of flowers. She had to go in through all these perils to bring him to Rivendell, right?
Right, and then she called on the river. Remember when she called
Yeah.
on the river, and to stop them from being, pursued over the river. That was
Power
to
over
me
nature.
now
Power over
power
nature.
power over nature. She had control over, over that, which is one of the most well done things in the whole. I just thought it was
And
fantastic.
and I'm going to
Yeah.
make a parenthesis here and relate this, and why women, and this is, I believe, because of the nature that you have about the feminine, or that polar side of the mother spirit is that the women have always been linked to the power of the earth. That's why witches and sorcery and all this, it was always, it was the archetype was the female, because they're the ones that can sum up the powers of nature, of that womb that is earth.
Uh,
So it's really interesting, and once you start peeling all this out, how important women are in being that nurture and that being that womb.
yeah, I mean, our mother spirit defines our whole universe.
Yeah.
Where is she? It's either she's either there or it's not part of our universe. So she's the and she always holds the center. It's just like you look at Arwen, and she was holding the center for
Hmm.
Aragorn to go out and do what he needed to do, and she stayed in Rivendell and was doing that. Just like Galadriel was doing with Celeborn, she was doing the same thing for the elves until it was time for them to depart. She, was holding a ring of power, and she was holding that place inviolate, for the good to survive until it was time for it to leave, to leave Middle Earth. And she was an incredibly strong, strong character, and just
Yeah.
very
Especially
uh
Galadriel.
yeah, yeah, I mean, she was just amazing. So that's another one that, a character for the newer generations. Of course, Tolkien was publishing. I read Tolkien in
The
high school.
30s. Yeah. That
Yeah.
Pope.
Well, the series Lord of the Rings got published at the end of the he was writing it, doing
Yeah.
World War II to his son, a lot of it, and it was published in the 50s, and
Yeah.
it became sort of a big deal in the 60s when I was a teenager. And it was I had a really interesting experience with that book. I can tell this sort of funny story. A friend had told me it was a really good book, and it was summertime, and I went down to a friend's that I knew bookstore, and I bought the first one, and he goes, "You better go, just buy the other two."
You bought the Silmarillion.
No, 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 I bought the first Lord of the Rings, but, it was the
Okay.
Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and then The Return of the King, and it came in 3
Okay.
volumes. Okay.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
So I
So,
bought the Lord of the Rings.
okay.
I had not read The Hobbit yet. I read The Hobbit
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
and
you
so
read
by
the first book of the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings, which is the Fellowship of the Rings, of
Right,
the
the
Ring.
Fellowship, yeah, right, and so I bought the Fellowship, and Gene, the guy at the bookstore, said, "You just better go out buy the other 2," and I said, "No, I don't know if I'm gonna like it or not or whatever." Okay, well, I took it home. I told you I was a voracious reader. I stayed up all night and read it. I read it cover to cover in one night, and I was at the store the next morning when Gene opened the door.
I imagine the laugh she
I
must have got there from that.
I had to have the next 2, and then I bought The Hobbit, but I
And
finished
the
the
previous two, three, and the
yeah, and then
I
I
know.
went back and started reading all. But anyway, those books they had a huge influence on me as a young adult. They were what Star Wars became later for me,
Yeah,
which that was like my Star Wars was to
these
you.
two
Okay,
stories, but yeah, Tolkien and Star Wars, and they bring such a great canon and so many characters and such a vast, amount of time in between the stories that you can create everything there. So I think that's why they're so important for modern
right.
generations. That's why.
Yeah, to look at how we see heroines and they do make they're much more
Human.
dimensional.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Their evolution in some cases into evil, how the
Uh-huh,
the orcs are created and how, you see, and it mirrors a lot of our history. And if when you look at them, and it's and I mean, it has to, because that's, I mean, that's coded in us, and that's what we are
right.
bringing out in our and the way that we think and that we perceive a reality. It's through these archetypes that we understand. So it's really interesting. Yeah.
Right, right, and so there's some and so, now we went from Tolkien and then we go through all the Star Wars, and then we get to Harry Potter for the next generation, okay? And of course, in Star Wars, we have Leia right off the bat, but of course, when you
She
go
kicks
back,
off the story, the message that she sends of distress, and she's the
yeah,
one taking the codes. Again, being being the vessel of hope, and that's why it's called the New Hope, because she is the vessel that is taking the hope. You don't know
right.
what's going to happen, but it's the seed of hope.
Right. And then of course you get the prequels and you realize what an amazing woman Padme was, and also Anakin's mother, I mean she was pretty amazing, all in all. And I mean the fact that she raised him and while she was still a slave on that planet and she
Yeah,
kept him alive and whatever. And, so, that there are those strong, strong women, but then there's Leia, and then ultimately we get to Ray, who is just amazing. So, all of these traditions that we're looking at, I've lived through all three of them. And when they first came on the scene and watched them develop,
yeah.
it's
You grew up with the stories of Star Wars, right? You
R
saw the
Yeah, and so it was, I got to Star Wars, when I was in graduate school in my 20s, and then, of course, then, Harry Potter was when I was in my 50s or whatever,
yeah.
50s, 60s, which I read every one of them and found them, absolutely
As if
wonderful.
you were a 15-year-old kid, 13-year-old
Yeah,
kid
right.
reading
I
it.
mean, anybody can read,
Yeah,
those and relate to them for sure.
yeah,
And but the neat thing is that you see that the women characters are much more um a much bigger part than anything that was before my teenage years. All that other stuff, it was like I said, I had to go to, old mythology to find a
yeah, yeah,
strong, really strong heroines. And so it's great. I mean, I think it's
yeah,
great because
yeah,
that we see the male and the female, and this is important for the males to see these stronger female characters as it is for the young females of today to see that they can be that way, but it's also to understand the dynamic
yeah.
between the male and the female,
Which, yeah,
and how they interact and can become supportive of each other and complementary to each other, and that they do come at every problem or every every incident they come from a different I
yeah,
mean, the male and the female brain is different, okay,
yeah,
and they come from a different angle on everything, but that's what's important is that you don't have just the masculine viewpoint, that's overriding everything, and that was what was so interesting when you look at these heroes' journeys and these three different traditional literary traditions that we've been talking about.
yeah.
That the idea of these interacting becomes even more and more developed.
And, and
As
and that's the beauty about these stories, Margie, is that it's not just the story of a character or this superhero,
Mhm.
but it's a full array of heroes and villains, and female and male, and how they complement each other, how they balance each other throughout. I'm just gonna point this out. Everybody picks a lot on poor Anakin and how he turned, but if Padme was a great statistician and she followed the rules, she has a little bit of fault falling for head over heels for Anakin and breaking the rules and knowing that he was a Jedi and he shouldn't be doing that. But anyways, we'll leave that. But that's
Yeah,
that's something. But that's something that you can relate. How many women have fallen and said, "I'm falling in with a bad guy." Maybe like, he wasn't in the bad guy at that time, but yeah, you can relate. That happens. Maybe when you start a relationship, this person was this way, but he evolved to another way. And it's important that you realize when that happens, which is very important. It's going beyond just the evident,
Right, right. You have to look at the actions and what's, what's going on.
And there
And
was an
that
evolution within Anakin, and that's something that she repeatedly and told him, when he killed all the sand people and whatnot. Padme saw that evolution, and she kind of that's why she called the Obi-Wan and everything that comes afterwards. But there was something there.
yeah, there was something there was something there, within his psyche, and he chose that path, and once again we also see in all these archetypes, we see where people make choices. Okay, I
Hmm.
mean, the choices, that you see, like in Tolkien, you see particularly the choice that Frodo makes to be the ring bearer. Okay,
Yeah.
but you also see the amazingly heroic choice of Sam to support Frodo in everything. Okay, and you see the choice that Arwen makes to give up her immortality, to be with Aragorn. You
And
you
give
know
it a hair, and
Yeah.
the heir to the throne. Yeah.
Right, and you see these, Merry and Pippin making choices. You see Gandalf making, when he decide, when he went down with the Balrog. I mean, he was defending them. The choice was to either take on the Balrog or run and probably still be decimated, or to take him on. And
Yeah.
and he gave up whatever, and was, of course, reformed as
Yeah.
Gandalf the White. But it is a decision, where you make a choice as to what to do. And they also make bad choices. Remember when they were going to go over the mountain and the snow was so bad and everything, and they ultimately had to go back down and go the other way. They made a bad choice. Okay,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they went another way. There are all these things where they constantly point out that there are um choices that people make. And one of the really interesting thing is, like in Star Wars, you know the Han, totally against his personality type and everything. He chose to still stay, as much
In
as he
spite of
griped
his
and complained.
personality. Yeah.
Right. He still chose to help and to be a hero in his crotchety old, I'm going to complain
With
every
all
minute
his
of the day.
faults and that we
Yeah,
know that he
right.
had, he's still a hero. Yeah,
Right. He's
definitely.
still a hero, and he makes his choices. And um even at the end, right before he's killed by his son, you can tell that he still loves Leia, and
Yeah.
that she still loves him, um and the same thing about Luke and the choices that he made later. He chooses to go off and stay on, that island by
Yeah.
himself, and then he chooses finally to not, to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
to be who he was supposed to be. And so here again, he didn't make necessarily the best choice for everybody involved. He basically disappeared off the map for a while. But then in the end, he turned it around and he made another choice. And so, and then, in that one, and it's the same thing where in in Harry Potter, there's a number of places where very pivotal decisions, choices that they have, are actually made, and
Yeah.
they are very consequential, and some of them are good and some of them, aren't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are huge consequences. But
Yeah.
um this is the thing to learn, that all of our choices, they're not always right, but there is redemption. You
And there's
can.
learning from them and
Right, there's
redemption.
learning
Totally.
from it, and redeeming. You can redeem it. And then so all these traditions have it. So
I
I
love
love
that.
reading them, because
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can
yeah. No,
see
and
them.
and I love it. I love this because I mean it's a great place to close the program. I mean it went so fast, but yeah, it's very important. So before we close, Margie, I know that you're working with Deborah, another member of the CFU, on a very interesting project, which is called Uncle Joshua's Workshop. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, I was very interested in, I realized that young parents today are so stressed because there's just so much information and there's just so many, things um out there, and and they're concerned about what is being foisted on their children, and all
Yeah.
this sort of stuff. And I knew, because I've known a number of people over the years, that a number of people that have been involved in the Urantia movement for years have created wonderful content for children.
Okay.
But it was very hard to find. You couldn't
Okay.
really find it anywhere. So the idea first was to be sort of like a bulletin board, so to speak, where people that had content, they would give us a link on the CFU website, and we could send traffic to and make it easier for young parents to find these sort of resources. But in the process of this, with Deborah, we decided we wanted more on the website, and because Deborah is just an amazing creative woman, we she had written some fantastic songs. Then we decided to team up with some young man named Daniels in Africa, to make videos, and then games like trivia games, and then where parents could download a picture for a child to color and read them a story,
Nice.
and all these. So this is sort of a resource for parents to, and all of this information it's not under any sort of institutional dogma of any way at all, but it's mainly just to give children an idea about God, and that they're loved, and that Jesus was a wonderful person that we can learn a lot from, and that that you live in an amazing world, and
Yeah.
that there are angels.
Presenting a loving universe, a loving God, a loving,
Right.
some things
And
that
so
the
we
children
wanted
can
we
take.
wanted that resource, uh, for all these very amazingly busy parents, to where it was sort of like a one-stop shop, where they could go and they could find content. They either could find content that is not housed on our site by other amazing creators, or they could use some of the content that we've created there too. But it was mainly in an attempt to support these, young parents with young children, who just don't have time to get out there and start hunting around on the internet for a lot of stuff. And so that was the impetus, and it's turned out to be it's been a fun thing to do, and a lot of people have stepped up and done some amazing work, and I'm just very grateful. We got it up a lot faster than I ever dreamed we would, but it came
Awesome.
online on the 19th of May, and we're just real happy. So people can go there and try it out. It's You can just do Uncle Joshua's workshop, and it will come up. So you don't
Which
even have to
actually,
go. Yes.
and actually, we're going to have the links right here in the descriptions and everything, so you can
Okay.
go directly. So
Good.
you can
Yeah.
just check it out
Put the link. Yeah, that would be
and
great.
give it a look. I think there's a lot of good stuff. I
Yeah,
did
this
show
is
it to my
for, kids 3 to 6, 7, 8, 9, and then, like 9 to 12. And so we divided it kind of in age groups, so that parents wouldn't have to like go through a whole, look at 12-year-old stuff when they have a 3-year-old. We wanted to kind of,
awesome.
help them not have to do that. And so we've got it sort of parsed by age group. But it's there, and we hopefully it's going to be useful to people, and they'll find it fun and interesting, and that their kids will be. And it works on iPads and iPhones and on a desktop.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's a great tool. And for anybody that wants to use it, you can check the link, and of course, use all the resources.
Mhm.
Well, we come to an end, Margie. I really thank you for coming. It was a very good conversation, and we touched on very important things on how we see reality and we get closer to God, and how important ideals and heroes and all these stories are fundamental for our growth and our longings to seek good in the end and do good. So thanks for coming, Margie.
Thank you, Santiago. I really had a good time. I enjoyed it. As always, being with you is wonderful.
Thank you, Margie, and thanks for you for watching. It's if you liked it, remember to subscribe. Hit the reminder button. I mean, we're every day basically of during all the weeks, so you can find us here. And if you really liked it, you share it, tell other people they might like it as well. So till next time, I'm Santiago Kneeland. This is the Divine Within. Take care and carpe diem. On the Divine Within podcast, we share real conversations to help you find a personal connection with God. My goal is to support your faith, growth, and journey toward discovering the divine within yourself. Join us to deepen your faith and spiritual journey.